As we all know, only Amiga makes it possible. But I've been trying to make some toast using the video toaster, and it just keeps making rudimentary CGI for game shows. God, I'm hungry. Okay, I know the retro gaming landscape is kind of ruled by the Americans when it comes to YouTube, and I'm sure there's a certain percentage of my audience who'll see the title of this video and be like, who cares about this crusty old computer that didn't have any impact outside of Europe? But here's the thing, the Amiga birthed one of the most creative and interesting arms in video game history because it was open to everyone. Bedroom coders and massive publishers would sit side by side to create interesting and varied software. There was no rulebook. Everyone just made what they wanted to make, and if a publisher found it interesting enough, then they'd take a chance on it and put some decent money into its marketing. Which is how we got all these really unique games that have stood the test of time. Not everything hits, and the European design sensibilities certainly make some games difficult to enjoy nowadays, but it's a fascinating library that I have a lot of nostalgia for. But what happens if you don't have an Amiga and you want to try these games out? Or what if you're like me and your Amiga's floppy disk drive stops reading discs and you want that Amiga fix but without all the lengthy load times? Well, there's always ports. For a while, I was trying to buy every single Mega Drive port of an Amiga game as this weird little collecting branch of my Mega Drive obsession, and while I don't have everything, I think what has been ported to the system still showcases some of the Amiga's unique character and variety. So let's take a look at 5 Mega Drive ports of games that were originally released on the Amiga! Eric Chahi's Another World, or Out of This World if you want to sound like you're working in a planetarium, is a 1991 cinematic platformer that puts you in control of Lester, who after doing a late-night experiment with a particle accelerator on a stormy night, finds himself unwillingly transported to an alien planet where he is imprisoned and has to escape. The game is unique in that its characters are animated using flat polygons that were rotoscoped over real footage that Chahi shot himself. It creates a really timeless visual identity that still holds up to this day. The game itself is very tough, with each scene requiring you to learn how to beat it with exact precision and under extreme pressure from a multitude of different enemies and environmental dangers. Thankfully, every scene in the game has its own password and you can retry as many times as you like, but it's a game that really requires save states and a walkthrough to really enjoy. It's absolutely worth seeing to the end though, because it's such a visually arresting title with a beautiful story that unfolds with entirely no spoken dialogue, making it easy to enjoy regardless of what language you speak. The Mega Drive version loses some fidelity due to the shrunken screen resolution when compared to the Amiga version, and the sounds and music aren't as atmospheric due to the Amiga being able to use high quality samples and the Mega Drive relying on FM synthesis. But this is still a great port of a great game that deserves to be experienced one way or another. The game was remastered for PCs in 2006 with much higher resolution artwork, and this version is now available to play on loads of platforms if you want a more modern solution. Cannon Fodder by Sensible Software is a top-down shooter released in 1993 that sees you guiding a group of soldiers into enemy territory using a cursor. You must carefully navigate the maps while shooting all hostiles to progress. You can fire with one button by tapping it, and if you find crates of grenades, these can be thrown by holding the fire button. It's a simple premise, but the increasing challenge and complexity of the maps keeps the entire game fresh and engaging, and it's coupled with a really catchy vocal theme. While you might think playing a game with a cursor on the Mega Drive might be a pretty dodgy experience when the game requires use of a controller and not a mouse, It actually feels pretty natural and you soon get accustomed to it. The in-game action very much looks, feels and sounds like the Amiga original, and that's a good thing because Cannon Fodder is a great game that still holds up. But the Mega Drive sound chip just can't do its music any justice. The sampled vocals are gone and it all sounds a bit cheap and nasty when you compare it to the lush Amiga original, which can still be enjoyed as a great piece of music even outside of the game. A shame, but the core game is still a lot of fun, and if this was your only way to play Cannon Fodder, you'd still have a great time despite the rubbish conversion of the music. "1991's Gods" by the Bitmap Brothers isn't as widely celebrated as its other games like Speedball 2 and the Chaos Engine, but this fantasy action platformer was praised on release, and it's easy to see why when you look at it. Big sprites, loads of animation frames, and just a general air of quality in the aesthetic department really makes Gods stand out from the crowd. But I think it's the game that suffers the most from European design sensibilities. You see, Gods doesn't have invincibility frames when you get hit. Your playable barbarian will just have his life sapped away if you stand over enemies, and the game requires you to take your time as you explore and be quick to attack before enemies attack you. Playing it is much more methodical as you carefully dispatch enemies while looking for items and pulling switches. It can be rewarding if you adjust to its playstyle, but I appreciate that a lot of players will be put off by the fact that you don't have iframes when taking damage. The Mega Drive version is a pretty faithful port when it comes to visuals and gameplay, but once again the FM synth cannot reproduce the sample-heavy music of the original very well, and you get this very abrasive take on the music that is better off skipped. Right, look, I know sports games aren't very exciting, let alone snooker games, but Jimmy White's Whirlwind Snooker from 1991 is definitely one of the more interesting and playful snooker games out there. Developed by Archer McLean, this snooker sim is rendered entirely with flat shaded polygons, which allows for a more dynamic 3D take on the sport. The game is widely remembered for its idle animations when you don't do anything before taking a shot. Sometimes flies will appear on the table, or the balls themselves will start making faces and taunting you. I'm also a big fan of naming the AI players Tom, Dick and Harry. There's also one of the jauntiest intro themes to ever jaunt its way onto the Amiga, and honestly the whole experience is a lot of fun. There's a lot of depth to the gameplay with a convincing physics simulation that helps the balls behave naturally, and the AI puts up a great match even on the lowest difficulty. What's even more impressive is that the entire game makes the journey to the Mega Drive completely unscathed. Everything feels, looks and sounds basically identical to the Amiga original, but without the lengthy floppy disk loading times. This is genuinely one of the best ways to play Jimmy White's Whirlwind Snooker, even today. The Killing Game Show, or Fatal Rewind as it was known on the Mega Drive, is a 1990 platformer developed by Raising Hell Software. You are put in control of a bipedal robot that has to run, jump and shoot its way to the exit, while also having to worry about an ever-encroaching water level that slowly rises, and will kill you instantly if you touch it. There's a level of urgency to the Killing Game Show that doesn't allow for a lot of error as you explore the stages, looking for keys to allow you to progress, but if you spend the time to learn its stages and find the best route through them, then you start to settle into a groove and it's very satisfying every time you make it out of a stage unscathed. Once again, you do have to deal with the lack of iframes when you take damage, but it feels a little more forgiving when compared to Gods, because the pace of the game is so much faster, making it easier for you to move out of harm's way. I think when it comes to the Mega Drive port, the Killing Game Show probably suffers the most from this batch of games. It's still not bad, with the main game actually being a great representation of the Amiga original. It plays and feels exactly the same, but the presentation lets the side down. The pre-rendered introduction has been completely removed, and the FM synth can't do the rockin' Amiga soundtrack any justice. We've also lost the cool reflection effect on the water, which is a bit of a shame because it's quite a striking effect in the Amiga original. Regardless, there's still a lot of fun to be had with the Killing Game Show on Mega Drive, and it's only really the presentation that takes the edge off it when compared to the original version. So there's 5 Mega Drive ports of Amiga games. There are actually loads of Amiga games on the Mega Drive that I'd like to cover on the channel in the future, but if there's any you'd like to see specifically, then please let me know in the comments, and I'll see what I can sort out for the next visit we take to the world of Amiga. Thanks for indulging my annoying Amiga fanboy, and if you've made it this far, then I hope you've discovered something interesting that you'd now like to try out.